If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hello and welcome to episode 30. In this episode, we speak with author and journalist Sim Kern. So Diane, how's it going?
Pretty well. Busy. I have insanely agreed as of tomorrow to join a challenge to write a 50,000 word novel in a week. I was kind of double dog dared into this. I'm sure it will be garbage and I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
Watch. You'll turn it out and it'll be genius, you know. You just got to take speed like Kerouac did.
I'm going to pour word vomit onto the page and hope the edit can sort it out afterwards. I'm not even going to grammar or spell check. I'm just going to be like, that's it. So, yeah, let's hope. And how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Things have just been crazy and hectic, and we've had a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes here, including my computer dying. I don't really want to get into it much beyond that. But
yeah, that was bad timing. Yeah,
it was really bad timing. So I'm a little bit behind on editing everything, and I've just been kind of like rushing around like a chicken with my head cut off, you know. And then on top of that...
Yeah, so if this episode's out late, we know why, right? So there you go.
Yes, exactly. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it, damn it.
Works for me.
And then on top of that, we've been having all this construction to our house, you know. Our house is really old. It's like almost 100 years old.
Right.
And, you know, I mean, you know, when your house gets to be 100, you know, there's problems and stuff. And, you know, we haven't done anything for 3 years pretty much. So we saved up some money to put into our house. And so now we've got like all these construction people coming in and out, fixing up things. And I will say one cool thing is we found in our bathroom, we found the original flooring.
Oh, yeah.
That was in, that was like in the 30s. And my wife wants to like try and restore the original flooring. So
fancy tile?
Yeah. It's like these little white octagonal tiles.
Nice.
Get them tested for lead.
Valid.
Oh, that's
valid.
Yeah, we should probably do that.
We have a house from the 40s and our bathroom tiles are full of lead. But it's fine as long as you don't go digging them up and messing with them.
Oh. Okay, yeah. That's a good idea. I didn't even think of that.
Sorry, I wasn't supposed to talk, was I?
No, that's great. We might as well start right into it, I guess. It works out perfectly. We're here with our guest, Sim Kern, and Alan has all the bio stuff, which we will get into as soon as we come back from this break.
Be right back. Okay, we're back. And so, as you heard, we have Sim Kern with us. Sim Kern is the author of Depart, a quiet horror novella about ghosts and hurricanes, selected for the honor list of the 2020 Otherwise Award. In 2022, their short story collection, Real Sugar is Hard to Find, and first installment of their YA sci-fi trilogy, Seeds for the Swarm, will be released. As a journalist, they report on petrochemical polluters and drag space billionaires. Sim is one of the hosts of Climate Fiction Book Club on YouTube and Instagram, and they tweet at sim_Kern, Kern. So check them out there. It's really interesting that you say you drag space billionaires because we have someone who helps us out with the podcast. He's what we call kind of like a columnist with the podcast who works for Public Citizens. Are you familiar with them?
No.
Okay, so what he does, he's the director of research there, and they basically like research corporate criminals basically, and then kind of publicize the information that they find.
Oh, okay.
They're a nonprofit. You should check them out. There might be some overlap between what you're doing and what they're doing, and he does a column for us every now and then called Spec-Fic Partisan is the name of it, and he likes to drag the one specific space billionaire in particular.
Yeah.
I am here for it. Drag in the space billionaires. This is a good plan.
Yeah, a lot of people know me from a Twitter thread I did last summer that went viral about just the total unfeasibility of billionaires escaping to space and just kind of getting into the science of why that's really not going to happen at all.
Thank you. I have made this point, although I doubt my data is as good as yours, but the facts are it would be cheaper and easier to repair the damage to this planet than it would be to put anybody on any other planet for any length of time.
Yeah, always. So yeah, that's one of my points. I mean, as a sci-fi author, obviously I love fantasizing about space exploration and travel. And there's some short stories in this book that do that, but I'm aware that it's a fantasy. And I think our science fiction has become so convincing and people have grown up with it so much that unfortunately a lot of people are really under the impression, I think sometimes even these billionaires themselves are under the impression that there is some escape to other planets if Earth goes bust. And it's just not possible.
Yep, not with the current technology or resources that we have anyway, for sure. Yeah, there's no way.
not in this generation or probably many, many to come.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. On one hand, yeah, I mean, I completely and totally agree with you. On the other hand, I do think there is a lot to be gained from space research and, and at least trying.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I'm on board with that for sure.
Yep.
But I guess the question is, like, if they space billionaires research and find anything, are they actually going to give it to anybody else, or are they just going to monopolize on it, right?
Well, yeah, and their purpose isn't research, it's tourism, So I think I'm a big fan of NASA because they're actually, they're doing science and that's just not the goal of SpaceX and these other companies. They're in it for money.
Hey, speaking of science, James Webb Telescope, guys, holy cow, everything we hoped for, eh?
Yeah, in my family we call it the Juicy Wobble Telescope or some other acronym because like being a trans person, like not really loving the fact that that it was named after the James Webb. But yeah, the pictures are really, exciting to see, and I'm definitely a fan of learning more about space and our universe.
Awesome.
Yeah. Absolutely. I had to show my kids the pictures. Just be like, no, those are not stars. Those are actually galaxies that contain billions of stars.
I know, right? The deep space field. That was something.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Sorry. I get it's not exact. I mean, we're a sci-fi podcast, so it's not off topic. But yeah, let's get back to the focus here.
No worries. We do that sometimes. So let's talk about you a little bit. So you went from teaching, you were an English teacher, is that correct?
Yeah.
So you went from teaching to environmental journalism. So that's a pretty interesting change. Like, why don't you tell us a little about that and how that kind of turned into writing fiction? Yeah,
well, actually, I started writing fiction first. So I quit teaching when my daughter was born. I had a lot of medical issues. Mm-hmm. That was 5 years ago. She just turned 5. I had to quit teaching because of medical reasons. So I had always wanted to write, and I was disabled for a year after giving birth to her, and I was having a lot of issues and multiple surgeries and stuff. So I was presented with this opportunity for the first time in my adult life of like not being able to work and like, what can I do? And I had always wanted to be a writer, mm-hmm. Just wasn't sure how to make that happen. And I finally had the time and space to do it. So I wrote the book that became Seeds for the Swarm, which is my young adult novel coming out in November of this year.
Excellent.
But I wrote it and, it's just getting published now. So it took me quite a long time to write it, go through the querying process, finding an agent, all these things. During, the last 5 years, I wrote all these short stories that ended up in Real Sugar is Hard to Find. I also, because of like my daughter being born, and finding out that she has a genetic condition that makes her more, susceptible to certain types of cancers. That happened, as well as a series of industrial accidents in my neighborhood.
Oh my gosh.
One of which that was well known was the ITC fire, which sent a black plume of smoke, toxic chemicals burning. It was 100 miles long. You may have remembered seeing the pictures of Houston, this giant cloud stretching across the sky from horizon to horizon. So that was I think it was like 10 miles from my house. The smoke was like right overhead. And so that was like a huge awakening for me of like, wow, what is in the air that I'm breathing? And I got to know more about the neighborhood I was living in. So I started becoming just an activist, trying to make some kind of difference in the air pollution issues in my very local area, and then ended up doing some investigative journalism into some of the most notorious polluters in my area. So the fiction and journalism were sort of side by side.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I can totally see that reflected in your short fiction now that you mentioned that, because you have a few stories where you talk about like the pollutants in the air and people have to kind of either stay inside their houses or you have one where they kind of have bubbles over the neighborhood, right? Yeah. And where they filter the air and that sort of a thing.
Yeah. And I kind of feel like I have to check the air quality every day before I go outside, even, for me, because I have asthma. So even on ozone action days, which like ozone action's like no big deal. I don't know, compared to some of the stuff, but sometimes there's like, benzene in the air. There's shelter in places in my neighborhood that, you have to know about. So it's almost like before we go to the playground, like, okay, is there poison in the air today? Can we go out?
Yeah, I'm also asthmatic, and actually I think that's partly why I'm having a little bit of I'm feeling a little bit slightly under the weather, is because of this construction that we previously mentioned, and probably combined with my asthma, it's just acting up a little bit. So I can totally understand. And then here in Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh's air quality is known to be pretty shitty, to be frank.
I bet you got those hills like funneling it all down towards the river, like it's kind of trapped, the air, I imagine.
Yeah, I would guess so. You obviously understand it better than I do already. I just know that we've got some polluters around here, and the local governments won't do anything about them. They just look the other way, and don't enforce any of the laws or anything.
Yeah.
So it's always a huge fight around here, with usually the progressive politicians really trying to push back and trying to hold them accountable, and then of course the conservatives letting them do whatever they want to do. I mean, and that's not always 100% the case, but that's generally the case around here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, that's the thing. We've been over this material before, but the fact is that if we want anything to be done, there has to be penalties with teeth, right? Fines have to be a percentage of corporate income as opposed to a dollar amount that they, wipe their butts with in the bathroom. You know what I mean? Right. And until that happens, we're not going to get any action, because corporations do what is in the interest of making money. That is the whole way the system is designed. And you are actually in dereliction of duty to your shareholders if you don't try to do that. So naturally, they are just going to ignore anything where there's more profit in doing it a certain way. And almost always getting rid of waste is hard, right? So they just ignore it and pay the fines. And if we want action, we need to make those fines matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same situation in Texas. I mean, probably worse. We have city leaders who would like to do something about pollution, but the state is just completely hostile to curtailing the petrochemical industry at all.
Mm-hmm. Texas state, is hostile to anything that makes any common sense at all.
Yeah.
Okay. Dear Lord. Every time I look at the news, I'm like, okay, Texas, what insane thing have you done now? Oh, that's even more insane than I could have imagined. Okay.
Yeah.
One of my colleagues works in Texas as well, so she's always complaining about it. So did you kind of accidentally fall into Solarpunk, or is that something that you intentionally work towards?
So I started, I've always been obsessed with the environment, and I say obsessed. I mean, I was just a concerned citizen, but, growing up in the 90s, I was like the obsessed kid. So I knew that I always wanted to be that a focus of whatever I wrote about. My young adult book, which is coming out this year, is kind of dystopian, but as you'll see, it's the first book in a trilogy, and it's going to move from dystopia to utopia. And you see the same progression in the stories in this collection. They're roughly arranged in chronological order of how I wrote them. And they're more dystopian towards the beginning, and then they get more utopian towards the end. And honestly, I just got tired of writing dystopias and living in a dystopia, trying to stay like ahead of the Trump administration in terms of what is horrifying, trying to stay ahead of climate predictions when like the world kept shattering the worst case climate predictions got exhausting. And I just started to feel, and a lot of it was being influenced obviously by reading other people who are exploring a more utopian space or anarchist writing. Ursula K. Le Guin is a huge influence, N.K. Jemisin, Nnedi Okorafor. And so reading speculative fiction that is creating more optimistic worlds and just feeling like, we only get this one life to live, and I'm having to live mine through this like collapse of neoliberalism dystopia. And at least in my head, I want to escape sometimes to the better worlds that are possible. And I think there's a huge utility in showing other people the way. I never started to imagine these worlds really until I read like The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin. Was such a huge eye-opener for me. I mean, it was the first really anti-capitalist, like not at all capitalist world I ever even read about. And I know for a lot of speculative fiction writers and just sci-fi readers in general, like that book is hugely influential. So sometimes, there's that adage, like it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. I kind of got bored of imagining the end of the world, and I wanted to spend more time practicing imagining the end of capitalism.
Yes. Yep. I feel you. Yep. We're on your page, obviously.
Yeah. I think that's, you're right in line with why we created this podcast. We got so sick of just everything being doom and gloom all the time. And just tried to, and like, there's got to be something out there that's otherwise. And for us, we consider ourselves more hope punk than Solarpunk. Although I do think, that Solarpunk sits within hope punk generally.
Yep. Big Venn diagram there, if nothing else, for sure.
I mean, almost completely overlapping, I would say, in my opinion.
Yeah. I would say.
Yep.
But we look at the two sides of, hey, let's try and bring forward some hope and show people that there is all these super intelligent writers, who are doing all this cool stuff, have hope and why they have hope. And then let's also show like how everyone is pushing back too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. We were given your short story collection here to read. I have not read all of it, but I have read some of it. I'm fascinated by the fact that you are getting into a bunch of the issues that tend to be like they're big issues right now, right? The very first story deals with reproductive justice. It deals with climate change and its effects. It deals with mass incarceration. Like you cover all of these things. I guess I just do you see all these things as being interconnected? Like, is this something that if we're going to tackle this, is this a Gordian knot that we have to address, or should people be worrying about specific things within that structure?
Absolutely. It's all connected. So the story you're referring to, The Propagator, is dealing with a couple different issues, but like it's a story about climate justice and abortion access, primarily. Yes. And it's showing the sort of essential connection between the two. Some of my other books, I have a book coming out next fall called The Free People's Village. And the whole really central thesis of that book is that racial justice must be at the heart of climate justice, or you wind up with greenwashing and eugenics. So I do think in addressing climate change, like there is no piecemeal solution.
Yes.
Total revolution is necessary to address it. I mean, really. That doesn't mean I don't believe in like harm reduction measures or the benefit of like trying to reduce harm in certain areas where we can.
Right.
And I especially believe that when it comes to like abortion access, like every single abortion that is wanted and happens matters. So whatever lengths, like right now, Texas abortion funds are going to really wild lengths to get anyone they can out of the state to where that they can secure an abortion. And like every single one of those people matters. So that means that all of the piecemeal electoral battles and judicial battles, they all matter. But when I talk about like what would it really take to halt and reverse climate change, like that is a total global justice movement that would have to overturn like all of our existing economic and social systems pretty much like fundamentally. Do I think that's likely or going to happen? Like, no, but that is what the moment calls for, I guess. So I like to write stories that show intersections between sort of different issues, things that maybe people don't realize are as connected as they are.
I appreciate that. And I think you're right? I do think that it is all interconnected. And at the heart, it does have to do with systemic injustices that are built into the way that, our current socioeconomic structure globally works, right? It's built on exploitation. In order for it to continue to function, you have to find somebody to demonize in order to make them into a have-not so that you can exploit them.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think it can function without that. The age of obvious colonialism is, behind us. It's not socially acceptable to just go in and, invade the Ukraine, for example, anymore among most people. So instead, we're using, it's still colonialism, but in a way it's worse, right? Because there's no responsibility or accountability, right? At least if, you in the days of empires with kings and queens and empresses and emperors, you could theoretically, as a subject, go to that crown and complain, right? But there's no crown to complain to because they're denying that it is colonialism at all, right? So
you're talking about financial colonialism?
Yes, I am talking about financial, economic, and also, the establishment of a military colonialism, right? Military colonialism. That is very much a thing, right? Like, okay,
it's all, yeah. And to me, I mean, it's all capitalism. It's racial capitalism. I really ascribe to the theories of Black Marxism, like outlined by Cedric Robinson and other Black radical scholars. And you really see like, there's the continuity from the early Renaissance and the beginning of colonial expansion through today, that's all been racial capitalism. And even the divine right of kings hasn't really changed. I mean, we started out talking about space billionaires, right? And Elon Musk is this heir, he was born into enormous wealth and power and has only amassed more over the course of his lifetime. And the same is true of virtually everybody in the 0.001%.
And in one of the most colonialist ways, right? His family made their money from conflict emeralds.
So we don't call it. So actually, I get depressed by that quote that everyone trots out by Ursula Le Guin. That's like people like people think capitalism can't be destroyed, but that's what they used to think about the divine right of kings. Something about that, right?
Right, because you're like, it never went away, man.
I think it hasn't really gone away, especially when you see the way that people on Twitter will like stand for Elon Musk. There's just like legions of tech bros who believe that Elon is taking them to Mars with him,
I know this deference to
yeah.
millionaires, billionaires, right? This is okay. What, like, do you think if you suck up enough, they're going to give you some? Like, what is your deal there, right? Do you think you are a temporarily embarrassed billionaire, and that the, inheritance laws that say that after a few $1 billion, you have to actually, share some of it with the public good? You think that's going to affect you somehow? Dude, you're nowhere near there. It's never going to matter. Okay. Right. Yeah, I know it's okay. Yeah. See, now you're encouraging me to get on my soapbox here. And I love it. I'm here for it.
I have that effect on people, I think.
Well, Alan will tell you, I often don't need much encouragement.
No.
I am on your page.
Diane is our frontline warrior type. You know what I mean? Diane's always standing out front, with the sword and the shield. Like, come on, let's do this thing.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. So I'm with you. I am with you. Yes. So, do you think that it's okay? This is a question as a writer who's concerned with the same kind of things that you are, right? I say it repeatedly on this podcast. I say we are living in the cyberpunk dystopia that we tried to warn you about, right? Some people looked at they looked at Neuromancer, they looked at 1984, they looked at these things, right? And they went, oh yeah, that's bad. And that's what we were intended to think. But some people looked at these things and went, instruction manual for my evil plan to take over the world, right?
Yeah.
So how can we, as writers who are keenly interested in trying to both bring awareness to these struggles that we all try to pretend don't exist so that we can continue to function in daily life without getting miserably depressed, right? And, finding a path through, like how do we do it in such a way that it's more hope and an inspiration than the cautionary tale, like that's,
yeah,
that's it.
I think that, yeah. And I'm reminded of, there's a lot of, criticism right now of The Handmaid's because of the abortion ruling that just happened, and all of these white women going to protest dressed as handmaids. And so many great like Black influencers, like people online and authors and critics are saying don't referencing Handmaid's Tale is not helpful. It was not a helpful book. It stole the experiences of Black and Indigenous women and people and
valid critique,
and said, what if this happened to white women? And again, it's a book that offers no solutions. And I think such a better, a dystopian book that I like much better, that really speaks to our moment, is The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler.
Yes.
And there was a great, and I wish I could remember who it was, but someone was tweeting about, Handmaid's Tale is for people who've given up. And Parable of the Sower is for people who plan to survive, people who plan to make acorn bread and learn to shoot a gun, when whatever's coming is coming. And so I think that, yeah, it's you have to ask yourself, is your book just out there, or is your story just to scare people and depress people? I don't think that that's particularly useful. And having, worked with editors at presses and magazines that are, that are focusing on climate fiction, they're inundated with these depressing, all is lost, nihilistic stories about climate change. And there's just, what do you do with that? There's just no...
I don't need those stories right now, right? I think there's a valid place for the cautionary tale. I do, right? And I try very hard not to judge what other people write. We write what we're inspired to write, and we all have our own reasons for having our own voice. But I agree with you.
Yeah, let me just finish my point, because I do...
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I do write stories that are cautionary tales, and I do think there's an important place for stories that really look closely at what's coming and give us space to feel climate grief. I don't think we can just be cheery all the time and, oh, it's going to be fine and we're going to do the revolution and it's going to be positive. Like, I don't like those kind of maxims. I like reading, like The Overstory by Richard Powers is this incredibly depressing 500-page book about trees. It let me feel so much grief that I needed to feel that I've been sort of holding in all my life about trees. Like, I just needed to cry a bunch about trees for 500 pages and I felt a lot better afterwards. So sometimes that's important, so I think it's like you can write a bleak story. Is it an outlet for grief? In my story, The Propagator, which you mentioned, which is about the reproductive justice, the character makes a decision to fight and to do something courageous. So it's like, is your story going to inspire someone to do that? Depart, which was my first novella, is very bleak and contemporary. And, it's based on my experiences of Hurricane Harvey. So partly it's just processing my own trauma from watching my city, flood, like biblically. But it's also, there's a message, and I don't want to like get spoilery, but there's a message in it about turning towards your community and, not choosing the path of just looking out for number one, even when the crisis gets really, really extreme.
So I think we're talking about writing about joy to some degree here, or at least writing about a way to resist. How do you as a writer write about those things? And like, how can other writers who listen to this podcast kind of use that to write stories that kind of push back in a better way?
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as like some of my stories are like, the more utopian ones are like an escape from the world that we live in and a vision of how things could be better, because I think we all need that and deserve that sometimes. And then some of them are saying, yes, it's bad now, or yes, things are going to get a lot worse, but here's what will still bring you joy. Here's what we'll still have these things. We'll still have community, and we'll still have music or cake, as the book's called. Real sugar is hard to find. That titular story is about a mother and son, like on this sort of epic quest to bake a cake in a world where like those ingredients have been made scarce by climate change. But the story is saying there still will be sweetness, right? So you just kind of have to, I think to get better at writing it, you have to be able to find it in your own life. We have to be able to set down the weight of the world sometimes and all of the dread and doom scrolling, and find joy and appreciation of your existence, even in these very challenging times that we live in. Because the incredible fucking thing is that we have consciousness and are existing on this one little planet, which, as the James Webb Space Juicy Wobble Space Telescope has shown us, is like 1 in a billion, trillion, gazillion stars or whatever. You get what I'm saying. It's a miracle. We're all made of stardust. And sometimes you have to like get off Twitter and like just appreciate that, and look at the wind in the trees and just find those moments of joy. And if you get better at finding that in your own life, I think you'll be more helpful to other people who need to feel that as well, if that makes sense.
That is a lovely way of looking at that. And I feel you. I think that's excellent. Yeah. And I agree.
Yeah, no, I totally agree too. I think it's a good way to look at it. So I challenge all the writers out there who listen to this podcast to go and do that stuff. I know I'm very guilty of being on Twitter way too much. So you brought up it's hard to find real sugar, and I found that to be a very interesting story for multiple reasons.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, I want to talk about the characters a little bit. I think you do a real great job with characters. I really enjoyed your characters a lot, and they kind of do things, and I learn things about them throughout the story that I don't really expect. So you had this thing going on, and this is light spoilers for everyone out there that cares about such things. So you already mentioned the story is about a mom and this boy kind of going out to try and find like cake ingredients in like this apocalyptic or kind of apocalyptic world. But and you set up the trope of like there's the annoying, naggy mom type, And then there's the kid who's just like totally embarrassed, like, oh my God, mom, right? But then at the end, you kind of flip it a little bit. And the mom is kind of like in with the gangsters at the end. And the kid like completely loses his love interest, right? I just found that to be just a complete like subversion of that trope. And I thought that was great. So like, how do you go about writing your characters? Do you consciously think about subverting little tropes like that? Do you have any rules for like realizing your characters the way that you do?
Well, that's, in that case, I thought it would be funnier that way. And I like to, I do things that amuse me, with my characters. So that's one thing. Characters. So for my stories, a lot of people character comes first to them, but my process is actually usually first like themes and world building. Like, as you can tell probably from this podcast, I bet like what we've talked about so far, I'm like a big picture kind of person, So I usually have like an idea, an idea I want to get across, like, Monsanto and reproductive justice for humans and for plants and climate change. These are all interconnected. And like, how can I do a story that illustrates that? And then I'll get an idea for like a vibe and a world, I get like some setting ideas and vibes. Like, is this going to be kind of noir? Is this like Real Sugar is Hard to Find is like kind of a campy quest,
Mm-hmm.
And then I have to figure out who the characters are. And that part is actually sort of almost like very pragmatic. Like I sit down and brainstorm. Sometimes I do like tarot readings. Sometimes I just like, because that can just sort of spark ideas.
Yeah, I've used that. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I do that sometimes, and I'll just keep plugging away at it, usually pen and paper. Like all my story writing I do on the laptop, but like brainstorming and outlining I do on pen and paper. So I just like play around writing character descriptions until it starts to sing, you know what I mean? And they start to feel like real people. And I'm excited about seeing what they do and how they talk to each other and getting to know each other. And then I go from there.
I did notice a kind of a dichotomy in your stories. And at one point, I wrote down very similar to Cixin Liu. I don't know if you're familiar with that author.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Pretty famous in China. He's like their Stephen King, but it's for science fiction.
Okay.
But his stories are very like, there are there's characters, but the characters completely don't matter at all. You know what I mean? It's all like that big picture, what is going on kind of stuff. But then you have stories that are like, it's hard to find real sugar, and what's the name of the first story in your book? You guys have said it.
Propagator.
The Propagator. Yeah, and the Propagator, where to me, I mean, yes, you have the world building, but it's really more about the characters than it is about the world building.
It's interesting. Actually, it almost seems like a reverse process from the way we're introduced to your world, because I got to tell you, okay, I really loved The Propagator. One of the reasons why I really loved it is because I am a person who has experienced difficulty with infertility and a miscarriage, right? And so I was very much in visceral sympathy with your protagonist, right? I was like, I was angry when they were angry. I was in pain when they were in pain. And I love seeing the world from that perspective, because I think that that's the best thing. Okay, I think fiction, this is why fiction can succeed where academic papers do not, because you can make people feel, right? So I appreciate that you do that. And I love the fact that the character is the last thing you create. That's actually really interesting and very cool.
Yeah. So I have a question.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I'm sorry I like killed the conversation there. I was just one writer to another. I'm like, I admire your technique. That's awesome.
Thank you. I used to, and it's one of those things that I used to feel like there was something wrong with me as a writer, because my process is sort of backwards from so many people are like, oh, the character comes to me and they tell me.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things where like, learn to trust whatever process works for you.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you about your resolutions too. I've noticed that you a lot of them are kind of open. You know what I mean? There's not what I would call like a hard resolution on a lot of them. I mean, there are on some, but not everything always ties up perfectly. Can you talk about that as an aesthetic choice, or maybe you didn't even realize that you were doing it? I don't.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is I don't feel that strongly that I know anything. So even though I say I'm like this big idea person and I've got these themes that I want to get across, like I'm very conflicted. The things I write about are like tricky issues or moral problems that my brain is like chewing on. And I don't totally know how I feel about them until I'm done with the story, you know? And sometimes even then I still don't know how I feel about them, but I've laid out some of what I'm chewing on for the reader to do what they will with. Like one example that's really like that is like The New Nomad, which is a book about like the decision to consciously choose to bring a child into a world that you know for sure is totally dying. That was me working through like, do I want to have another kid or am I done? You know?
Yeah.
And it's left with my decision, but it still feels kind of open-ended, I hope. And I think to other people, like, you know, whatever they'll come up with.
I love that. Okay. And it's something that, you know, again, it's a breaking of molds, right? There is an expectation that we're going to wrap up all the loose ends at the end. You know, I have had stories rejected on this basis. It doesn't conclude, right? I'm like, but the character's still working through stuff and the events that were the section of the thing that was the story are done. So I don't know what you want from me. Yeah. Yeah. Right. I love that. I love the fact that you're not afraid to do that. I love the fact that you're not afraid to illustrate by the open-ended ending that these are complex and not everybody's answers are going to be the same. And there may be no satisfactory resolution in many cases because life is not like that. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree.
I know Sim's not taking my compliments very well here.
I'm so sorry. I'm really awkward about compliments. I'm so sorry. I don't thank you. I don't know what else to say.
It's cool. It's cool. I'm feeling bad for like driving the conversation to a close, but yeah, no, I admire your work and I think people should check it out. I hope that's coming across.
Don't feel bad, Sim. I'm the same way. Someone compliments me and I'm just like, okay, that's nice. Moving on to the next thing. I just shut it out completely. Like it doesn't exist.
Yeah. We should get better. Guys, I'm gonna take a moment here to go. It's important to accept your compliments and recognize what you're doing well, so you can keep doing these things if you respect the person that's giving you the compliment, right? I mean, you know, because there's people whose opinion I don't give a rat's ass about, frankly. But I mean, you know, right? Like
that's true. It's very wise.
We need that, right? We need that. So yeah, just say thank you, take a moment to accept it, and you know. Then move on. Yeah, it's cool.
Sim, another question for you. So now that you're a self-identified Solarpunk, how do you feel about Solarpunk as a movement? And do you feel like it's gaining steam? Do you think it's like maxed out already? You know, what's the future look like for the subgenre? Because I feel like this is
it losing the punk? I feel like hope punk is in cases. I've looked at these, you know, hope punk anthologies. I'm like, all right. And then I read their description and I'm like, no, you guys are like, you know, this is not an episode of My Little Pony, you know. Anyway, yes.
So do I think it's like the question about like, do I think it's already done? Like, absolutely not. I think it's enormously gaining steam very rapidly. I think the interest, even just over like the last 3 years, it went from like really virtually no one having heard that term or knowing what it was to an explosion of interest in it. I think we have yet to see any sort of Solarpunk visions be realized in like mainstream TV or movies, which would be really cool to see. It's very unlikely to see. It will be the sort of the last hurdle. I think the demand for it needs to get big enough because those big capitalist industries don't want to create these stories necessarily.
Oh, I'm sure they have no interest in that at all.
Against their whole thing. But I think if there was like sort of a runaway bestseller Solarpunk story, and I hope there will be, then that, you might see that play out. And they'd probably kill it in the movie version. They'd tone down all the anti-capitalist stuff.
Oh yeah, totally boulderize, I bet. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of questions there. In terms of like, if you're asking me about like optimistic science, a turn towards optimistic science fiction, and I'm going to use that instead of Solarpunk because it also includes like African futurism, Afrofuturism, indigenous futurisms, which those writers really, many of them have said they don't like being put under Solarpunk because they feel like that's like a white label and it's not what they're doing.
Valid.
So, but just like a turn towards optimistic science fiction is, I sort of feel like just getting started and is really going to continue picking up momentum. I certainly hope it will. And I predict it will, just because we went so grim for so long and people want something else. And now the world is just so grim. People want, that escape. And I think that definitely the best works of Solarpunk or optimistic science fiction are being written and still to be written. And I'm really excited to see what's coming down the pipes.
Awesome.
That is an awesome answer.
I'm glad that you're feeling positive about it. So me and you have a lot in common. Not only can we not take a compliment, but you mentioned earlier that you kind of feel like you never know anything. And I'm 100% like that as well. I always feel like, well, even professionally and something I've been doing for like 15 years, I'm like, well, this is the way it is. And then I'll sit back and go, but is it? Like in my mind, you know what I mean? Like I can just never have it one way ever. Yeah. But I guess my point is that, I feel like it's gaining steam too, but I worry about the punk part being taken out because to me, that is the most important part because we have to fight back. If we don't push back somehow, right, then the rest doesn't matter really.
And the punk part to me is the anarchist part, right? Or the communist part. Like it can't be, you can't have like the capitalist Solarpunk future because it doesn't make logical sense. Right. Like it doesn't hang together. But, the younger generation, these Zoomers are very anti-capitalist. They know so much anti-capitalist theory compared to where the millennial generation was at their age. There's this huge, shift towards unionizing and embracing unionizing in the US. So these are sort of the things that give me hope and I see momentum building. Definitely like the forces of upholding the status quo will be pushing against this type of movement every step of the way, but the people want it. I believe the people want Solarpunk.
Yeah, I hope so. I really hope so.
Yeah.
You brought up something else that's been pinging around in my brain for, a couple years now, because I really identify more as kind of like a leftist socialist type of person. But a lot of the writers I like and a lot of the people I've been talking to later are actually more like anarchists. How do these philosophies go together? Because seemingly on paper, they're completely opposite ends of the spectrum, right?
Well, not necessarily. Then there's anarcho-communists and anarcho-syndicalists. And honestly, I don't pick any of those labels because I get to be a fiction writer, not a leftist theorist. So I don't have to. Right. I do try to read leftist theory, and I have read some, but a lot of it is just so insufferable. But I think that communism and anarchism seem really far apart if you have a very cursory knowledge of them and like accept the Western definitions of them, especially like if you think that Soviet era, if you think the Soviet Union was an example of communism, then that's going to seem very, very different. I think it's interesting. So I do read some leftist theory, and it's definitely influenced my work. And again, I would say a huge influence on me is Angela Davis, Cedric Robinson, and all the scholars that follow in his tradition. I'll just say I think it's valid for fiction writers to get their leftist theory from TikTok and then run with it. That's totally valid.
Look, the fact is we don't have time, right? There are experts out there for a reason.
Exactly. Find some leftist TikTokers or YouTubers who you admire, and you don't have to read Das Kapital. You can get these ideas in meme format and understand them and run with it. And that's actually what Daddy Marx would have wanted.
Nice.
Yep, totally. And I agree with you completely, by the way. You actually read the stuff. Yes, it's insufferable. Oh my fucking God. Right? Yeah.
Okay, so it's about time that we wrap up. There's a question that we ask everybody all the time, and that is, what is giving you hope right now?
That's a great question to ask a trans person with a uterus living in Texas raising kids. What is giving me hope? Honestly, I'm friends with a bunch of people who work in abortion funds, and they're just the most incredible people in the world, and they're my heroes, and they give me hope because they're just still finding ways to fight the power. Anyone who's forming a union right now is giving me hope. My kids give me hope. A lot of hope. Especially my 16-year-old is just so aware of everything going on in the world and really understands it on a level that I was just so did not at their age. And then things like the baby woodpeckers that live in the dead tree next to my house, deep in the heart of Houston, in this petrochemical capital of the world, right? Things like that. Those baby woodpeckers give me hope.
Awesome. I love it.
Amazing. Cool.
A lot of people say nature, and a lot of people say young people.
Yeah. It's common.
People like you give me hope, actually, Sim.
No.
It's really nice to meet other people out there who are, fighting the good fight, right? It makes it seem less overwhelming and exhausting. So I hope you keep doing it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we want to know where people can find you online and what's coming up immediately, your latest.
Okay, well, I'm all over the internet as Sim Kern, everywhere. So Twitter is at @Sim_Kern. On TikTok, I'm Sim Kern. On YouTube, I'm Sim's Books. And I'm also on Instagram, Sim Bookstagrams Badly, because I am bad at Instagram and I don't like Instagram.
Fair.
I'm honest about that up front. I also have a website, simkern.com. You can pre-order Real Sugar is Hard to Find, or depending on when this comes out, because it's coming out in 2 weeks. So depending on when this episode is released, maybe you can already buy it right away. So Real Sugar...
Likelihood would be yes, it should be out probably by the time this
Okay,
comes
great.
out.
Then you can get Real Sugar is Hard to Find. That's the name of my short story collection we were discussing. And it will be available at all your favorite online retailers and also from my publisher, Android Press.
And it's awesome, and you should go get it.
Thank you.
That's my advice there.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on, Sim. We appreciate your time.
All right, I had a great time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, and we are back from our conversation with Sim. Before we go on, don't forget to share our podcast with your friends on Facebook or Twitter or whatever social media kids use these days. You can also go out there and rate or review us if you like. Finally, if you really like what we're doing, check us out on patreon.com/ifthisgoeson. We could always use the contributions. And you can also find us on coffee.com as well. That's KOFI. Just search If This Goes On and we will pop right up.
Hey, crowdfunding is one of the few ways we have to fight the capitalist system here and for the world to support what they want to hear. So if you want to hear us, this is a good way to do it. Yeah, okay, so these, corporations are taking a share even of that, but we get the bulk of it, guys. So,
Yep.
Yeah, crowdfunding, crowd publishing is the way in which the people get their voices heard. So,
Yep, 100%, and we could always use it. There's some goals that we want to reach, and we're not quite there, but we could really use your help.
there you go.
So, all right. So, Diane, impressions, feelings.
You know what? I'm so glad I got the opportunity to read some of Real Sugar is Hard to Find before we started, because I really connected with it, and I really liked Sim. I feel that, this is a person who is on a page that I am on and cares about a lot of the things that I care about, and I think that I would probably enjoy their company if we were hanging out.
Yeah, I gotta say, we have a lot of awesome people on here, and there's a lot of them that
we do.
I relate to in many ways, but Sim is one of those people I feel like we'd actually be friends in real life.
Right.
I cannot say that about
exactly.
all of our guests.
No, I mean, I love the variety of people that we have on here, and I especially love it when we run into somebody who doesn't necessarily share my worldview, because then that gives me an opportunity to challenge myself and make sure that I think what I actually think, right? But yeah, no, I think that if we lived anywhere near each other, I would hang out with Sim. I would invite them out for coffee, Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I found it really interesting about how they feel like they write backwards compared to everybody else. And I think that I thought it was funny that you brought that up too, because I had the exact same thought in my mind, but being a non-writer, I didn't want to throw it out there because I wasn't.
It's not backwards from everybody else. There are so many different processes out there. So you start where you start. It's just very interesting that their process, it seems like it's from the back end because the characters are so vividly realized. Often that's something, I'm babbling, but okay, writers who tend to write stories where you really feel the characters as living, breathing people usually start with the character. So it's a big surprise to me that they don't, because their characters are so vivid. Asimov doesn't give a shit about his characters. No. Never did. His characters are windows into his big idea. That's all they are, right? And that's fine. There's validity in that story. I still read Asimov, and people should read Asimov. He's a big influence, and a lot of his ideas have influenced the field, and it's important to understand them. Whether you like him as a person or not, that's not relevant. You should still understand where he's coming from because it has influenced the field. But it's like a total reversal of the experience of reading one of Sim's stories, right? Sim is all about, for me, it was very visceral, and I love that. That is what I'm looking for in my fiction. That's what I tend to identify with best. I'm back reading those SF Masterworks lists, by the way, right? So I'm educating myself on all these works that have influenced the field. And there's so many different styles that people approach it from, right? But that's my favorite, right? The favorite where it's about the person trying to deal with the experience that they are in. And yeah, so it's just very interesting that they start from the other end and then come back to how would a person in this nonsense experience it, right? And I love it. I love it because it seems counterintuitive, but that's a good illustration of the fact that there's no wrong process for coming at writing. Everybody's got their own way, and if it works for you, it's valid and it's good.
Right. So I'm glad that you brought up what you're reading. I'll just mention this real quick. I am reading a book called A Few Good Elves by Diane Morrison.
How are you now? Uh-oh. Huh. Here we go. All right. Well, cool.
A future SF masterwork right here in my hands.
Oh, you're sweet.
You believe it? Well, I'm only on page 10, to be honest with you. I haven't gotten too far yet. But I expect it to be an SF masterwork.
Well, don't set the bar too high, but no. I hope you like it. I've gotten good reviews. Be warned, it gets pretty grim in places. And yeah, let me know how you feel about it when it's done. And be honest, I can take it.
All right. I will. But not on air, I promise.
Only if it's good, put it on the air. No, I'm kidding.
I just wanted to let you know I was reading it.
Honest review honestly helps regardless of whether your review is entirely positive, because then people know what to expect. And if you didn't like it, other people who share your tastes in reading will know it's not for them. And then I won't end up with a 1-star review from some guy who's like, this was crap because it, mentioned orcs and elves having a fight in space. And I'm, because people do that, right? Why did you even pick it up? It's on the cover, but yeah, right? So,
okay, I was one thing, and then I'll shut up, and then we'll end the podcast. But I'll never forget when I worked at a bookstore, this guy coming up to me, I don't know, he was probably like in his late 50s or early 60s or something, and he's like, I don't want none of this sci-fi wizards fighting in space crap. I want real sci-fi. And I was like, okay, I think it's all sci-fi, sir. And he's just going to give me this nasty look. I was like, all right, I'll ring that up for you. Here we go. Have fun. Have a nice day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then I just judged him a lot after that. And I still am, apparently. So
apparently, yeah. Yeah. You know what? People will read what they want to read. And not every book's for everybody. And it's, it's totally fine. Right?
Yeah. No, absolutely right. Absolutely right. Just have some open-mindedness, people. That's all I'm saying. All right. Let's wrap this thing up. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We appreciate it, as always. And we'll see you again next time.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And thanks, Alan. This one was a lot of fun.
If This Goes On, Don't Panic is edited and produced by Alan Bailey. Our theme music is by Father Flamethrower. Additional music is by Christopher Snydrosky. And outro music by Sable Aradia. Intro by Dave Robinson. A special thanks to our guest, Sam Kern. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll see you again soon.